We have heard of the great Mesoamerican civilizations, the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the South American cultures that built the great cities in the mountains, such as the Inca. But how many of you can name a great civilization in North America? Probably only a few of you. And yet, one of them, Cahokia, was the first and the largest pre-colonial city north of Mesoamerica, in what is now the USA, Illinois. Its population was so large at its peak that it even dwarfed contemporary London. Yet despite its monuments and exotic goods, no high-resolution timeline of their monumental construction or long-distance material imports exists. What does exist are wooden marker posts, which served as public monuments and exotic artifacts. These marker posts can be dated and sourced, providing a chronological and spatial scale, which can help researchers determine the scale of Cahokian trade and the peak of their monumental building. It is thus that Dr. Nicholas Kessler and his colleagues dated and provenanced the largest known marker post in the entirety of the Cahokian area, the Mitchell log. What they found was the exact date that this massive tree was felled, when the Cahokian polity was at its peak, and where the tree had originally come from. But before we get into that, let me tell you about Cahokia. Cahokia emerged as the largest city north of modern-day Mexico around 1050 CE, with a population of around 20,000 or more living in the Mississippian River floodplain. Around a century later, around 1100 CE, Cahokia had become the preeminent political and administrative center in the Mississippian mid-continent and southeast. It is best known for its construction of large earthen mounds. In fact, the largest of the 120 mounds, Monk's Mound, was the largest earthen construction in the Western Hemisphere in the time. Cahokia grew rapidly in the late 11th century, with immigrants forming as much as 1/3 of the population before reaching its height in the mid-12th century, when Cahokian goods, people, and ideas reached from the Gulf Coast up into the Great Plains. However, its population and influence were not to last much longer, and only a century later, around 1200 CE, it began to decline. Exactly how fast or even why this decline occurred is unknown. Perhaps it was climate change, resource depletion, environmental catastrophe, or socio-political fragmentation. One of the most important and common types of monumental structures the civilization left behind, besides their earthen mounds, were marker posts. These were large wooden monuments made from tree trunks and set into the ground near prominent buildings, in communal courtyards, and atop pyramid mounds. In the pre-contact Cahokian world, poles acted as axis mundis, physically connecting the upper, middle, and underworlds and helping mediate these powers and people's relationships with them. The Mitchell's log, today 3.5 meters long, was the largest of these posts. It was discovered in 1961 in the Cahokian outlier precinct known as Mitchell. Now dry, the basal portion alone weighs just over 1 ton, which is about the weight of one male bison. Based on the depth of the post pit and the length of the extraction ramp, it is likely that the post was once 18 meters tall and would have weighed between 4 and 5 tons, which is slightly heavier than a female African elephant. The pole had been made from bold cypress, making it one of the few examples in the greater Cahokian region made from this species. The bold cypress is not known to have grown locally and thus would have had to have been an exotic import. Given this information, it is likely that the use of bold cypress was restricted to the houses of the elite families, special shrines, mortuary areas, and similar public monuments. Dr. Kessler and his colleagues used radiocarbon dating and strontium isotope analysis to determine when and where this massive tree lived. The examination confirmed that the tree was indeed a bold cypress, and it was felled around 1124 CE. The log had a total of 194 tree rings, making it 194 years old, with the outermost ring indicating it had been felled in summer. Meanwhile, the strontium isotopes revealed that the tree was definitely not of Cahokian origin. In fact, some of the reasons from where it might have come were southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, western Tennessee, or southern Illinois. Of these, the nearest source was at least 180 kilometers away from the Mitchell site. The most likely method used to transport such a massive tree would have been by floating or rafting the log upriver in the sloughs and backwaters of the Mississippi, although they may well also have simply carried or dragged it overland. Interestingly, the timing of the Mitchell log procurement is within the time interval when earthen and wooden monumental construction had peaked. At this time, the regional agricultural system was most highly integrated, and exotic materials were most evident in and around Cahokia. In other words, they acquired this massive log during their golden age, when they had the strongest ability to organize thousands of workers and exert the most influence across the region. The Mitchell log's cutting date also helps us understand the timeline for Cahokia's decline. Assuming the log stood for around 1 or 2 generations before natural rotting set in at the ground level, it would have broken or been removed around 1150 or 1175 CE. This time frame corresponds to when nearby ceremonial buildings were abandoned and the entire Mitchell site underwent major changes. The log would thus provide an almost direct date for when the region-wide political and economic decline in Cahokia began. This timeframe coincides with a climate characterized by droughts, changes in the types and quality of exotic materials, and the transformation of public spaces and construction mounds. However, this does not confirm that Cahokia was seized by drought. What we know is that after 1200 CE, no more oversized marker posts, such as the Mitchell log, were being emplaced, marking the end of an era for North America's first great city. This was Archaeology Tea House. If this video was your cup of tea, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell to never miss a video.